afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackie Bowens. I'm the president and CEO of the District of Columbia Hospital Association, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on the benefits of sugar and sodium reduction in hospitals. The DC Hospital Association is committed to our partnership with the district hospitals to provide education that supports efforts to reduce the availability and consumption of sugary beverages and sodium-rich foods to improve health outcomes in the district. Today's webinar features local and national experts who will discuss the latest research, the biggest challenges, and best practices for reducing sugar and sodium availability and consumption in hospitals. We hope that the information you receive here this afternoon will offer education and tools needed to promote healthy options to your patients, staff, and visitors. We thank you again for the work in the district that you're doing in this regard, and we very much hope that you enjoy this webinar. It is now my pleasure to turn over to Ms. Yolette Gray, our Senior Manager, Public Policy and Community Engagement, to introduce today's speakers. Welcome, Yolette.
Thank you, Jackie. It is an honor to support this work at the association. Today, we invited 4 speakers who will each discuss benefits and strategies for sugar and sodium reduction. Our speakers are Dr. Neil Bernard, Susan Levin, Bunny Fatak, and Nancy Harris Buckley. Dr. Bernard is an adjunct professor of medicine at the George Washington University School of Medicine and president of the Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine. Dr. Bernard has led numerous research studies investigating the effects of diet on diabetes, body weight, and chronic pain, including a groundbreaking study of dietary intervention in type 2 diabetes, funded by the National Institutes of Health, that paved the way for viewing type 2 diabetes as a potential reversible condition for many patients. Dr. Bernard received his MD degree at the George Washington University School of Medicine, where he also completed his residency. He practiced at St. Vincent Hospital in New York before returning to DC and founded the Physician Committee. Susan Levin is Director of Nutrition Education for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting preventive medicine, especially better nutrition and higher standards in research. Ms. Levin received her Master of Science in Nutrition and completed her dietetic internship at Bastyr University in Seattle. She has earned a specialty certification in sports dietetics from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Bunny Fatak is the Assistant Director for Healthy Food System and Food Program at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. In her current role, she manages community relations and programs at food pantries, community meal programs, food banks, and public schools with the goal of increasing access to healthy foods among vulnerable populations in Northwest Arkansas. She holds a bachelor's in international relations and global studies, a master in diplomacy and international relations, and a master in secondary education. Her background includes international teaching, public relations, and recruiting. Before joining UAMS, Bunny coordinated a 4-county weekends feeding program for children at risk of weekend food insecurity at the largest community food nonprofit organization in Northwest Arkansas. And lastly, Nancy Harris Buckley is an instructor of human nutrition, dietetics, and hospitality innovation at the School of Human Environmental Sciences, Del Bumpers College of Agricultural, Food, and Life Sciences, at the University of Arkansas. She received her Master's of Science from the University of Arkansas. She is a registered dietitian and is passionate about educating others about healthy options. We will now hear from Dr. Bernard.
Well, thank you so much, Yolette. Let me share my screen, if I may. Okay, can you see that all right? Oops, let me make sure.
Yes.
Let me make sure this is working. Okay, all right. Why are we talking about sodium today? We're talking about sodium really for one basic reason. That's that sodium does a lot of things in our bodies, but one thing it does is it raises blood pressure. And if it raises your blood pressure, it increases the risk of stroke, the risk of heart disease, the risk of kidney damage. Now, I'm going to show you quite a few images today. If the little photo strip on the right-hand side of your screen is getting in the way, you can just minimize that or drag it out of the way. All right. I mentioned stroke, heart disease, kidney disease, but there's one other thing that has been getting on our radar, and that's just cognitive decline. There's a huge study in Brazil, more than 7,000 participants. They were followed for 4 years, and high blood pressure, even modest high blood pressure, led to cognitive decline. And most worrisome, it didn't have to be long-term high blood pressure. Short-term hypertension increased the risk of dementia. So what do we need? You need some. The recommended dietary allowance for sodium is about 1,500 milligrams per day, or 1.5 grams. But the max is about 2.3, so there's not a big window. Where are we? We are a little on the high side. The average American is about 3393 milligrams per day, a little over 3 grams. Now, if we're feeling bad about that, there are some countries that do a whole lot worse. In Japan, soy sauce and things like that have unfortunately meant that sodium intake is enormous. And as of the late 90s, after lots of efforts to get sodium down, they were still up at over 12,000 milligrams a day. So that doesn't mean that we don't need to reduce it. We do. So the question is, which foods are better? Are there some foods that are worse? And the answer is, yeah, foods vary a whole lot. Let's look at them. Most sodium in foods does not come from the foods themselves. And surprisingly enough, it really doesn't come from the salt shaker either. Where does it come from? It comes from food processing. When cheese is made, a huge amount of salt is added. When a soup is made, salt is added before the can is sealed up. And to show you the differences in processing, look at this. A potato, 13 milligrams of sodium. Potato chips, 330. What's the difference? The difference is the sodium added at the factory. And when it gets to be cheese, you're seeing things really getting kind of off the scale, especially with processed cheese. The sodium is really, really high. So you can get some sort of basics about which foods tend to be pretty good, which foods not so good. You will generally see that if there isn't salt added, fruits, grains, legumes, meaning beans, really low in sodium, basically no sodium in them. Their cation is potassium. And then if you look at processed meats, processed cheeses, commercial soups, lots and lots of sodium in them. But for the most part, that's added sodium. Now, these figures are a little deceptive because one person is not going to eat 100. These are all 100 gram servings, so it gives us a good comparison, but you're not going to eat 100 grams of turkey bacon. You're going to have one strip maybe. So let me give you the actual serving size. Again, the apples and rice and beans look pretty good. And you see, well, these processed foods still are much, much, much higher. Okay, so what do I really want to hit? According to the Health and Sustainability Guidelines for federal concessions and vending operations, for a food, specific food, one food, 480. For the whole meal, about 900. Let me give you an example, and I want to draw from which foods we need to focus on. The CDC says your breads, rolls, pizzas, sandwiches, these are where the high sodium foods get kind of tucked in. Well, how does that work? Here's a sandwich. Now, my target, 480. Where is the sodium in that sandwich? Is it in the lettuce? Nope. Is it in the tomato? Nope. Mustard has a lot of sodium in it, but I mean, how much mustard can you put on a sandwich? Oh, the bread. All right, there's some sodium in the bread. Oh, and the turkey slices. Yep. And if I put Velveeta on there, that's got quite a lot too. What can I do? Well, my target has been exceeded by about 4 times. So if I want to reduce the sodium in this sandwich, I can change the bread. I'll use a low sodium bread. And that helps a little bit. Wait a minute. I'm really not getting to my target at all, am I? I'm consuming about 1,500 milligrams in just that one sandwich. All right, let's make a little bit smaller turkey serving. 3 slices down to 2. That'll help. I'm going to cut my Velveeta serving to about half, just 1 ounce. And I'm still too high. Uh-oh. What can I do now? Well, here's a lesson. Remember how the cheeses tend to have a lot of sodium in them, so do the processed meats. If you go to the store and you get some hummus, an ounce serving has only 125 milligrams of sodium in it. Can I make a hummus sandwich? Will anyone eat it? I don't know. Let's see. If I make some changes and I use a roasted pine nut hummus instead of the meat and cheese, look what I've done. I have dropped my sodium content so low that I don't even need a low sodium bread anymore. I could use typical bread and I'm going to still be under my target. Okay, cool. Are there some other things I can do? I've got mozzarella, high sodium, right? That's the typical thing at the cheese factory. Did you ever make a tofu mozzarella? People who do this will swear their friends are never going to know the difference. And if you look at the tofu package, there's the sodium. Does that say 0? 0 sodium. Okay, that's good to know. Could I make a low sodium pizza? Could I make a cheeseless pizza? Maybe. You might need some nutritional yeast to give it that flavor, but you can do these simple swaps, getting away from the processed foods. Again, where's the sodium? It's really not in that food itself. It was added at the factory. And if I can find a different way of doing it, I'm going to be better off. Do Americans want this? You're going to ask this as a food service provider because you'll get the occasional complaint. But the vast majority of people support this. 58% have already tried to reduce the amount of sodium in their own diets. They want more control. They think the government ought to jump in. And a lot of them mistakenly think that there are already limits in place when there really aren't. So healthy foods can be really delicious and tasty and attractive, and your customers will thank you for it. I want to shift gears and just bring one thing to your attention really quickly. And that's something coming down the pike. Hospitals are thought leaders. Everybody knows that. And so the American Medical Association back in 2017 asked hospitals to do 3 things. Serve plant-based meals every day for anybody who wants them. Eliminate processed meat, that's bacon, sausage, ham, and promote healthful beverages. The American College of Cardiology did the same thing. What are they thinking about? The processed meats are driving colon cancer and heart disease. So now that's a challenge, but it's real. The World Health Organization says that the processed meats, like bacon, if you serve them every day, they increase your colorectal cancer rates quite significantly, about 18% per serving per day. So this is GW Hospital, a picture that I took, and we're serving these foods pretty much every day for the staff. And the AMA says, it's time to change that. Why? Because we did the same thing a generation ago. We learned that tobacco, which was on sale in our hospital, and I, as a resident, would light up my Merit menthols on the way to the doctor's lounge. Yes, I did. When our hospital decided we were not going to sell them anymore, I quit. And so did a lot of other people, because hospitals are health leaders. The food service is arguably the most important part of the whole hospital, because that's where we not only feed ourselves, we teach ourselves too. So look to hearing more about the AMA's request for help. And thank you so much for all that you do to help everybody be healthier and well-nourished. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Neil. I think that leaves me to go next. Dr. Barnard went over the why, and I'm going to go into some of the how. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, reducing sodium sounds good. There's a lot of reasons why we should do it, as Dr. Barnard went over. So I'm going to go into some of the putting this into practice. And I want to address 3 common questions. And one is, well, how do you maintain the flavor when you're reducing the salt? How do you stay on budget? Is this going to cost us more money to reduce the salt in our recipes? And has this been done before, and has it been done successfully? So we'll address all 3 of those issues. And I want to start with taste, because this is, of course, everyone's first notion when they think about low sodium. It's like, ooh, how does that taste? And I'm getting a lot of this information from something called the Healthy Menus R&D Collaborative, or HMC for short, which is a CIA, the Culinary Institute for America, initiative where they invited members from all over, volume food service leaders, technical experts, manufacturers, suppliers, to join this collaborative to discuss these issues around making foods healthier. And this was one of them, how to make foods low sodium and not lose the flavor. And the first piece of advice was, well, just use less salt. And this comes from, well, I get this quote from the vice president of applied research at McCormick. I think we've all heard of McCormick spices. And he said that, you know what, consumers, based on research, consumers cannot tell the difference between a food product that has 10 to 20%, so up to 20% of its sodium has been reduced. They can't tell the difference in the taste compared to the standard recipe. So that's a really easy fix, right? You just lower the sodium. And the vice president for food and beverage of Uno Chicago Grill, huge food service. I know them as Chicago Uno Pizzeria around here. But he said, you know what? You don't even talk about it. You just reduce it because people literally cannot tell the difference. Use more herbs and spices. There are a lot of herbs and spices out there whose oils just enhance the flavor. They enhance the color, the appeal of the foods without raising the sodium. And people tend to focus more on that and not so much on, oh, but I don't taste the salt, right? Because they're having these new other flavors pop in their mouths. Vinegars, juices, and extracts. This is such a great tip for how to replace the sodium with other products that you already have in your kitchens. And there's so many different types of vinegars. And of course, you know, balsamic vinegar, herb-infused vinegars, rice wine vinegar, red wine vinegar, juices from lemons, limes, oranges, and other extracts. And I want to just give a specific shout out to this particular tip, because I know I've had in huge kitchens. I was once in the Geico's headquarters employee cafeteria. They were making healthier changes to their menu as well. And they took Brussels sprouts that used to be doused in olive oil and salt and baked. And what they did was they used lemon juice instead of the oil and the salt. So thus reducing the fat and the sodium content. And I was dubious, but they tasted fantastic. And this is now the only way I prepare Brussels sprouts in my house. We're sauteing greens with something like apple cider vinegar instead of some salty animal-based product that might be in there to provide flavor, which is going to ultimately provide more sodium, unfortunately. And the last area I want to go into is umami. And if you're not familiar with this word, it's just another word for savory or savoriness of the food. And it is considered one of the 5 basic tastes now. And it has to do with how much glutamate is in a certain food. The more glutamate in the food, somehow the more umami flavor or the more savory it is. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Just a special shout out to herbs and spices. Yes, they bring in flavor and color, kind of that aesthetic appeal that they may offer a menu item. But they also may have some other qualities, or they certainly have constituents to them and compounds like tannins, flavonoids, polyphenols, alkaloids, all these things that are protective and anti-tumorigenic and anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic, and may help with glucose lowering and cholesterol lowering. So there may be some health benefits too to adding in herbs and spices over salt and sodium-rich products. I just threw this slide together just as a resource. I'm not going to go over it. I'm not a chef, but something I have appreciated is having, I have all the spices in my pantry, but I have no idea how to combine them, how to make flavors. That is not my area. So I found this nice resource that might be helpful to what do you do with all these spices to make, how do you combine them to make foods taste good? So going back to umami, There are a lot of different examples of foods that have a higher glutamate content and thus are considered more savory just by their own nature. Here's a short list: soy foods, fermented foods. So that could be anything from like kimchi to miso paste, which is just a soybean paste. Peas, corn, potatoes. Dr. Barnard talked about nutritional yeast flakes. That's another fermented food that doesn't bring a lot of sodium, but it has that something, which of course now we know is called umami, but you can add that to your recipes and replace foods with these products and still get that savory or salty taste without adding sodium. Now, I want to talk a little bit about replacing meat with some of these foods because meat is such a big contributor. Meat recipes tend to bring a lot of sodium with them. So we're going to talk about replacing, because this is where a lot of research has been done, getting the meat out and getting the umami in and seeing how it works. Why would you do that? Because it reduces the sodium, sure, but it also reduces the saturated fat, or really bad fats that are associated with heart disease. It can reduce the cholesterol content of the product, and it also can reduce the calories. Hey, and we're not just taking away things, we're adding things, we're increasing people's vegetable intake, and we could all use that. So there was a study on this exact thing at the University of California, Davis, where they put together what they called a taco blend. It was just a beef filling for a taco. And what they did was they subbed out 80% of the beef with mushroom. And I'm talking like button mushrooms here, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, little white button mushrooms. And it led to a dish people liked, but B, 25% less salt in that recipe. And I have to say, on the other side of the continent, you can do this in Massachusetts too, apparently, the flavor intensity of that 80% sub out, so 80% mushroom, 20% beef, was as satisfactory in flavor to the consumer as a recipe that was 100% beef or 50% beef, 50% mushroom. So more mushroom, better health content, better nutritional components to that product. And they even had, these consumers even said they had a preference for the mushroom blend with the lower salt compared to the full salt recipe. So it's just an endorsement, maybe proof positive that umami does actually work in terms of giving you that flavor without adding sodium. And in fact, in a lot of cases, reducing sodium, fat, cholesterol, and other things in that product. And I have to say that I jammed this slide in at the last minute because last week the study came out. I got to put my dietitian hat back on, that said that it was in Hanes data, so the federal nutrition database, that said the more mushrooms people consume, the less likely they are to die early, reduce mortality risk for those people compared to the people who ate fewer mushrooms. And beyond that, if you replace red and processed meat, which is exactly what they did in these taco blends at the two universities, if you replace with mushrooms, you also reduce that person's risk for all-cause mortality. And a different study, but by the same group of people in a different journal, also said that when you eat more mushrooms, you reduce your risk for cancer and especially breast cancer. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, let's talk about cost. Is this going to cost my kitchen a lot more money that I just don't have? And yeah, going back to the that collaborative, HMC collaborative, they said, yeah, there might be a little bit more increased cost with testing recipes, getting your shelves stocked with these different items if you don't have them, doing collaborative efforts and taste tests. Yeah, there might be some cost possible, but a couple of other studies referenced here talk about how when you start to sub in more plants and get away from some animal products, especially meat, you overall will save money, anywhere from $750 to $1,200 per person per year. It's a little different when you're looking, it's per person shopping. It's a little different in an industrial kitchen, but you kind of get the point. Eating healthfully doesn't mean it's going to cost more money, or serving healthier meals won't either. But I wanted to get some actual data from a colleague, a dietitian who works at the Adventist Health Howard Memorial Hospital in California, who implemented some of these changes to get healthier menu items in her hospital. I said, well, what did that cost you? Does it cost more? And she sent me a couple of examples, which I thought were pretty telling. A 2-egg omelet with cheese. That's something on their menu, still is. And it costs about $1.26 to their kitchen. And it comes with more than 700 milligrams of sodium, for the consumer or the patient. However, if that same patient were to choose oatmeal with dates and nuts, it costs a quarter of the amount at 30 cents, and it only brings 17 milligrams of sodium in that product to the patient, which is fantastic. This is exactly what we want to see: lower costs, less sodium. What about lunch or dinner? A beef burger costs this particular hospital $1.13 per patty. It comes with 423 milligrams of sodium. What about a bean patty or a veggie burger? 1/3 of the cost at 33 cents per patty and about 25% less sodium. So that's kind of a win-win all around with cost. Okay, what about have people done this kind of thing successfully on a larger scale? And the answer is yes. And this is one example, the Healthy Hospitals Food Initiative. This is a initiative started by the New York City Department of Health, and they worked with many hospitals around the city to try to implement healthier policies for healthier environments in hospitals. Had 20 standards, and 5 of those standards were about sodium. So you can see how important this is considered. We've got to get that sodium down if we want a healthy environment in a hospital. They have these are the 5 standards regarding sodium, pretty specific numbers and targets to get to. And I'll say that of all the hospitals that were participating in this, and there were 28 hospitals, zero of them met any of these guidelines when this collaborative started with the Department of Health. And then after a lot of work, this wasn't overnight, but so collaboration among staff. And when I mean collaboration among staff, I mean not only the kitchen, but the dietitians, the other staff on site, the people talking to the patients, front desk staff, the vendors who provide the food. So the patients, the customers who come in, making sure that everybody's involved in these changes, whether it's taste tests or marketing. Talk a little bit more about that. But what they found was that 21 of the hospitals could meet and did meet those sodium goals, which was considered a big success to meet all of those goals. Another big global effort was funded by the CDC, run by the CDC, called the Sodium Reduction in Communities. This was 20 different settings, and that could be a restaurant, a hospital, it could be a business, a place like an employee cafeteria. So they looked at all these industrial-sized kitchens and tried to get these sodium reductions in place. Again, run by the CDC. Big collaborative effort, again, working with a lot of people to make sure everyone's on board. It was a 4-part strategy, which develop those guidelines like we saw in New York did for pretty specific numbers, implement the changes. So that's a big deal, working with everybody to get everybody on board, finding the products at the vendors that have lower sodium, doing those sub-outs and those replacements, working with umamis and getting the herbs and spices on their shelves. Marketing, this is very important, right? You just don't start this and throw it out there and hope everything goes well, but you want to get everyone on board, but you also want to give them incentives. You want to have point of purchase marketing strategies. One thing is like, hey, we have greens in this casserole that were grown in our community garden, or whatever it might be, to get people on board to choose the healthier option. Maybe it's the green, get the greener, the lighter carbon footprint food product today, whatever it may be. And then collecting consumer information to make sure that there's satisfaction in what you're serving and what could you do better. So being organic and just making changes as needed. And the outcomes were pretty good. The average sodium content per food or meal went down by more than 250 milligrams per item. So that's pretty good. And interestingly, hospitals reached the most people of all those 20 settings that they worked with. Hospitals reach the most people, more than restaurants, which I thought was really interesting. And I think a testament to how important it is for hospitals to have healthy options, because for some communities, hospitals are the restaurant. That's the best place for someone, maybe the only place for someone to get a fresh meal and to get a healthy meal. And interestingly, the sales, so back to the cost, the sales of those low sodium foods actually increased. I'm sure in no large part due to taste tests, good marketing campaigns, and just that overall collaborative effort. So just walk away points here, how to put this into practice like now. And I'll just review some of the things we already talked about. Subbing in herbs, spices, umami, just doing those subs to make it work. Replacing high sodium products. So kind of back to Dr. Barnard's presentation, you could not have the processed meat and the processed cheese sandwich, but rather you could have the hummus sandwich. Put more vegetables on a product, put more fruit. And I believe it was HMS. I don't know if HMS is the vendor for foods. Most food service in airports is run by a company called HMS. And they said this is what they do. They just replaced products that were high in sodium, like the processed meat and the cheese, with other things like hummus, or just more content of those low sodium foods. The senior director of Food and Culinary Service at Johns Hopkins said the same thing. I just substituted herbs, spices, fruits, and vegetables. Those are all your low sodium products, and they make for good, healthier meal items. Just reduce the salt. Remember, we talked about how you reduce the salt in food by 20%. Nobody knows the difference. Perfect. Salt swaps. This was an interesting recommendation by the Harvard food service director, who said that he just uses diamond crystal kosher salt instead of the salt called for in the recipe. This easy swap means he doesn't have to change the recipe. Something about the cut of the kosher salt, the crystal kosher salt, just means it has less sodium because it's bigger chunks of rock, basically. Using potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. Of course, in the hospital, you'd have to consider how that might affect renal patients. And then implementing these global initiatives like the HHFI in New York, or the sodium reduction campaign run by the CDC. It doesn't have to be that big. It can just be the hospital itself putting in guidelines that it wants to meet and then meeting those targets. And that's it for me. And I would like to introduce Bonnie, who is going to go next.
Thanks, Susan. Let me get my screen share. Are we seeing that correctly?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good afternoon. I want to thank you for inviting me to share today about sodium reduction, which is a project I have spent almost 5 years working on in public schools, early childhood centers, and the charitable food system in Northwest Arkansas as a part of actually the CDC sodium reduction project that Susan just referenced. At the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, we're driven by our mission, which is to improve the health, healthcare, and well-being of Arkansans and others in the region, nation, and world. And so why sodium reduction? Arkansas leads the nation in the number of cardiometabolic diseases, including adult and childhood obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. And by focusing on sodium reduction, we hope to reduce the risk factors associated with these diseases. In 2016, our office was awarded a sodium reduction in community program grant administered by the CDC's Division for Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention. The grant funded community programs to implement strategies to reduce sodium intake to no more than the maximum amount as defined by the dietary guidelines, which is about 2,300 per day. And awardees were required to work with food service providers and industry partners to increase the availability of lower sodium foods. Our team is in the final months of the project, but during the 5 years, like I mentioned, we targeted K-12 schools and charitable food partners. But today I'm going to primarily share our examples and lessons learned from our work in K-12 public schools, because many of the same activities can be applied to the hospital setting and were done so by other cohort recipients that we work with as part of the SRCP project. So the goals of the program were to increase sodium reduction practices in food preparation, such as adjusting standard recipes, creating stronger food service guidelines and procurement practices, including changing purchasing and bid language to require lower sodium products be offered as the default item, and adjusting the food environment to encourage students, teachers, and administrators to choose lower sodium and healthier options. The intermediate goals of the project were to increase the availability of lower sodium meals served and then ultimately purchased by consumers. And these goals were achieved through the training of child nutrition directors and staff, as well as engagement with school food vendors and suppliers. And finally, all of the goals have been measured by total reduction in sodium offered and served to students. So over the course of the last 4 evaluation cycles, our team found that 1.7 million milligrams of sodium were served in the 30 schools' lunches that we observed over 10 days, which is approximately 4 pounds of salt, or the average weight of this fuzzy lopper rabbit. And the highest entree we observed and tracked was over 2,300 milligrams of sodium per serving, and the highest side dish was over 1,100 milligrams. So both of these are far above the recommended Smart Snacks in School standard, which is 480 milligrams per entree. And over the course of our partnership, we have removed an average of 123 milligrams of sodium per diner. And the most recent high sodium entree we tracked was 1,634 milligrams of sodium, which was a decrease of over 700 milligrams. And the highest sodium side dish served was 964, a decrease of 134 milligrams. So our program really focuses on small changes that amount to large results. In this case, we were able to remove 1/6 of the weight of the bunny rabbit in salt from school meals. And free changes we often begin with are adjusting the layout of the serving line to emphasize fresh fruits and vegetables and removing excess salt from recipe preparation. Low cost recommendations we've helped partners implement are replacing ingredients with lower sodium alternatives like tomato sauce, which is used in a number of recipes. By changing this one ingredient, you can easily reduce the sodium in a number of your recipes, including lasagna, pasta, pizza. But some of the recommended activities we work with partners to implement do involve some cost, like signage, displays, or packaging. But by making changes to the food environment in these different ways, you're able to reduce the pressure put on your consumers to make a healthy choice, because by default, it becomes the easy choice. And eventually, we've found all of these small changes add up. Over the past 4 years, these stealth health interventions have led to a 9% sodium reduction in purchased products by students in school cafeterias. And I'm happy to say that even with COVID-19 greatly interfering with the traditional school meal service, sodium is still lower today in our schools than it was at baseline. So since it's the beginning of baseball season, I thought we would start here at home base. And our programs and partnerships always begin with a baseline data collection. We have to know where we're starting to know where we're going and what realistic goals are for change. By gathering baseline data, evaluation data, our team helps partners set customized goals. For example, each year after the total sodium served and offered is analyzed by our team, we work with each child nutrition director to look at the 10 highest sodium items that were served in the time frame we're looking at, and then suggest modifications and changes that can be easily implemented to lower sodium. By using this system, we're able to support schools by addressing their highest sodium items first and only focusing on a few key meals rather than trying to look at the whole menu and asking for all of those changes at once. Once we have our baseline data collection and analysis complete, we work on implementing meal and menu modifications. These often include procurement and recipe changes as well. And procurement is an easy way to begin to lower sodium. Our registered dietitians and project managers work together to review current purchasing practices and items, and then identify similar but lower sodium alternatives. These changes have included swapping out frozen green beans instead of using canned, using low and no sodium added canned tomato sauce, and changing the chicken nugget serve to a whole grain chicken nugget bite. In order to ensure that these items are going to be acceptable substitutions, we often host taste tests and sampling events with child nutrition directors and staff. Our team requests samples from vendors and typically focuses on 1 or 2 items per event. For example, we recently held a mashed potato sampling where we reached out to different vendors and requested a variety of their lower sodium offerings. And we prepared and presented them to the child nutrition directors to identify a tasty alternative to what they were currently serving so that we could ensure that the replacement would still be acceptable to their students and customers. So I do want to be sure that we're not implying that in order to lower sodium, you have to change your whole menu or remove favorite items, because we know that would create a backlash among your customers or consumers, or in this case, our students. And so we do really start by encouraging partners to make changes that are small and that in some cases, or in hopefully most cases, students or consumers won't even notice. And this is a stealth health approach. And our partners have also made recipe adjustments. One of our school districts has a dedicated baker, and she was able to experiment with the salt content in homemade rolls until the sodium was lowered by almost 50%, and it still maintained a delicious taste and texture. Another example of a menu and recipe change we made was swapping out the chips in the nacho bar for a no salt added chip, because the chips are the base and then piled high with cheese, which is high in sodium, taco meat, high in sodium, and jalapenos, high in sodium. So by changing the chip in the meal, students didn't even notice that change had occurred, because so many of the other ingredients were high in sodium also, and it maintained the taste they were familiar with. Along those same lines, we've also provided no salt added taco seasoning for these same recipes, because combined foods often have multiple ingredients that have a high amount of sodium. And by adjusting 1 or 2 of those ingredients, you can reduce the overall content of sodium in the meal without impacting the integrity and overall taste of the meal. And this is what we like to call our stealth health approaches. We're sneaking those healthy foods in there. But along the same lines, we do want to encourage stealth health practices. We also want consumers and students to be aware of and make healthy choices. So we do this through a number of behavioral economics approaches, including marketing and student engagement. Our team has designed posters, flyers, table tents, and more to highlight healthy items and encourage healthy behaviors. We've created a how to build a better salad bar sign, a sign to encourage students to choose plain milk over chocolate milk. And these simple changes nudge consumers and students to make healthier choices and build healthier habits. We've also worked with schools to make healthy choice the easy choice by adding fruit baskets to the checkout line rather than having chips and cookies there, laying out the serving line so that fruits and vegetables are offered multiple times on the line, which encourages their selection. And we have encouraged partners to use different serving utensils and trays to make healthy foods more visually attractive to consumers. We've also held a number of sampling and taste test events specifically for students. We worked with one school district to host a lower sodium food show where students, teachers, and staff were able to sample lower sodium offerings from a variety of vendors and distributors. The students then voted on their favorite items. We also, at that same event, prepared homemade ranch salad dressing and mango and tomato salsas with lower sodium and asked students for their feedback on the recipes. By providing samples to the students, they're less afraid to try new things because they're not losing out on something they know they really like and want on the serving line. We also like to sample new recipes with students. One of our child nutrition directors received requests for more vegetarian and vegan meal options from students, so she reached out to our team to develop some recipes. And last February, right before COVID-19 hit, we presented an enchilada taste test to junior high school students. And we prepared and served black bean and sweet potato vegetarian enchiladas throughout a week at various junior high schools in our area. And each day the team debriefed on the feedback they received from students and staff and then adjusted the recipe to reflect that feedback. And this was a great opportunity to develop a lower sodium recipe specifically requested by the students. And I'm sure a similar event could be held post-COVID with hospital staff to receive their feedback on healthier options that can be served in your cafeterias. And once again, you can use Stealth Health here by asking vendors to only bring lower sodium options for the staff to vote on. I know many of your patrons, or I imagine many, want comfort food when they're visiting a hospital cafeteria or working long hours. So we always want to be sure that the changes we make are easy and small and you can build on them over time. You could also ask staff for requests and provide the opportunity to your chefs and cooks to try new recipes and tweak them based on feedback from customers. This typically improves buy-in from your customers and increases the likelihood that they'll choose those meals in the future. Staff training is another critical area where we have worked to gain buy-in and trust from the people actually preparing and serving food in the cafeterias. Food service is a hard job, and I'm sure many of us have at one point in our careers worked in the food service industry and know that it is a difficult profession. We like to use staff training as a tool to not only teach new skills about preparing healthier foods, but also uplift and empower those employees in their work. Preparing food for hundreds of students, or in your case, doctors and nurses a day, is not easy, and especially if you're serving a diverse number of meals like salad bars, pizzas, lasagnas, and grab-and-go sandwiches. So we work with partners like a local culinary school and Nancy Buckley, who you'll hear from next, to hone basic food preparation skills like knife skills, measurements, and food temperatures, but also on more fun or interesting topics like plant-based entrees and elevating canned and frozen vegetables. These trainings are conducted by culinary professionals with years of experience and allow staff to work with highly skilled experts to learn new and innovative ways of preparing and serving meals. These events have also been critical avenues for our team to build trust among the child nutrition staff and the people preparing the meals on the front lines. Our ongoing evaluation efforts have been designed to ensure that the changes we suggest are effective in meeting nutrition goals. So we do an annual cafeteria environment assessment where we visit each school's cafeteria and make observations about the layout of the serving line, what is being served, and the dining environment. From there, we can once again make suggestions like increasing the availability and variety of fresh fruits and vegetables being served and making salty snacks less accessible. We also conduct an annual nutrition analysis that collects the same data as our baseline evaluation. And this provides us a continual check on progress and new opportunities to set new goals. And we're also able to identify specific areas for intervention. For example, this year, due to COVID, we found a lot of sandwiches and wraps were being served, but they were particularly high in sodium. So in response to this, we hosted a training on how to prepare sandwiches and wraps with lower sodium and designed a handout and poster outlining and encouraging healthier sandwich and wrap ideas. So we help our partners sustain the changes they make through a number of activities. First, throughout our partnership, we develop and implement different nutrition policies, and we've worked with partners to adjust their bid agreements to highlight their preference for lower sodium products. Now I don't even have to remind our partners. They go straight to their vendors and distributors and ask, is this the lowest sodium product? And so hopefully that will be sustained long after our project comes to an end. But we have found that by putting these policies into practice, we can ensure that the habit is built over the long term and this changes will be sustained and long lasting. We've also worked with school wellness committees to emphasize the importance of school meals and highlight the value of investing in healthier school meals for children. Our team has also developed a materials, tools, and training library for existing and new partners who want to learn more about how to reduce sodium, and that includes resources like recipes, posters, and training videos. So even during COVID-19, partners were able to replace and change 17 different meal and menu items. Some of the changes were very lucky to us, like we had an Arkansas 2021 pepperoni shortage that led to the removal of pepperoni and meat lovers pizza from many serving lines. But others were a little more difficult, like changing a sweet and sour chicken to an orange chicken recipe, which lowered the sodium, but took some adjustment in planning to implement. So in conclusion, over the course of the last 4 years, our school partners have adjusted and changed 65 meals and recipes and replaced 82 ingredients with lower sodium alternatives. We've also been able to implement nutrition standards like updated bid language to add preference to lower sodium products, as well as require annual staff training that includes nutrition modules. We've also been successful in increasing the number of entrees that meet the Smart Snack standards of 480 milligrams of sodium per entree from 26 to 74. And we know that by making these changes and improving the overall nutrition of school meals, we'll be able to help students improve their long-term health outcomes. And I look forward to answering any questions that you may have later. And now I'm going to pass the presentation over to Nancy Buckley.
Hello. Well, welcome to the University of Arkansas. I'm in the kitchen lab where I teach dietetic students how to cook, basically. So today I'm going to take all of the information that you have been given so far in this webinar and kind of try to give you some very practical, basic ideas and things that you can do with it. But first, I kind of want to know, does anybody have any idea what 2,300 milligrams of sodium looks like? Of course, you're not going to answer me because you can't, but I'm going to show you anyway. So here's my little salt shaker. It's this. It is 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon equals 2,300 milligrams. So I want you to keep that in mind. That is what your recommendation to stay with 23 or below, 2,300 milligrams or below. All right, so here are some practical things that you can do. First of all, learn to read the labels. When you're looking at the nutrition facts labels, as you can see, it will have the calories and all the information, but it also has the sodium amount. So if it is 5% or below, that means it is a low source. If it's 20% or high based on the daily values, that means it's a high source of something. So when you're talking about sodium or added sugars, you want to make sure you stay on the lower end. But reading the labels are important, especially if you're trying to reduce sodium, because you can have the same product with 2 different brands and the sodium content is going to vary greatly. For example, here is some couscous, and this couscous is a seasoning with roasted garlic and olive oil. And here's another one, roasted garlic and olive oil. So they basically are just couscous and they have a packet in them. But if you look on the back, this one has 540 milligrams of sodium per serving, which is 2 ounces. This one has 440 milligrams of sodium per serving, which is also 2 ounces. A plain couscous like this one has 0 milligrams of sodium. So instead of buying one that has the flavor packet, you could get one like this and you could create your own flavor, okay? This is roasted garlic and olive oil. It's very easy to roast garlic. You can probably find a YouTube video on it, but basically you just wrap garlic up in foil and put it in the oven and roast it. And then you could infuse olive oil or your favorite kind of oil. Flavored oils are very easy to make. We make flavored oils in one of my food labs. This one, I actually bought these, I didn't make them, but this is an orange and this is a lemon. So basically you have an oil and you take the zest and you kind of like heat the oil up, put the zest in and let it sit for a bit. You can do it with chili peppers. You can do it with rosemary, any kind of herbs, but you can make flavored oils that you can use as a seasoning instead of salt. Also, I wanted to show you this. So when you're talking about like soy sauce, I think Dr. Bernard mentioned China and their soy sauce, you know, their consumption of sodium. So this one is a low sodium version and this one is a regular version, and they're the same, made from the same company. The one that is regular has 900 milligrams of sodium in 1 tablespoon. The low sodium version has 570 milligrams in 1 tablespoon. It's still an enormous amount of sodium. So when you have a situation like this, one thing you can do is use half and add water, especially if it's going in a marinade or in some sort of a sauce. You can also use coconut aminos. They have a very soy sauce-like flavor, and they have very little sodium in them. Another reason it's important to read the labels is because, for instance, here are some diced tomatoes. We talked about tomatoes in some of the recipes that I worked with Bonnie and making pizza sauce and things like that. You can make your own pizza sauces instead of actually buying it jarred, but you want to have a base of tomato sauce or tomatoes. And so it's important to read the label for that. So this one has 200 milligrams of sodium, and this is the no salt added, and it has 5 milligrams of sodium. So you would want to purchase the no salt added as much as possible. You could blend that. You can also make your own seasonings. It's very easy to go buy seasonings in bulk. And Susan mentioned this in her slide. It had a bunch of the different kind of seasoning blends, and then the different herbs or spices that are going to be included in those. It's very easy to do that. You can just find recipes for it online, and you just, if they call for salt or sodium, just leave it out. Also too, you can find different, so a can of reduced sodium beans here is going to have 210 milligrams of sodium. A no salt added would have 10 milligrams. And then your regular can of beans here is going to have 410 milligrams of sodium. So if you have a hard time trying to find products that are low or no sodium, no salt added or low sodium, you can rinse them. You just open the can and rinse it under water. You can do this with corn, green beans, any kind of beans, as long as they're not seasoned. It's best to buy the versions that are not seasoned and then season them with your own herbs and spices. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little demonstration that what we did. So when we were, when I worked with Bonnie at UAMS, we went in and did kitchen training in sort of the public schools. And we kind of came up with, she mentioned the mango salsa recipe. So I'm gonna make mango salsa for y'all. Okay. So here is my little trusty cutting board. I think y'all can kind of see what's going on. All right. So when we did this, we wanted to be able to do it so that the schools could make it easily. And making, you know, usually fresh mangoes was just unrealistic for that amount of people. We do this in my food lab. I teach them, we usually do fresh because I would need to teach them some nice skills, but we also do it with frozen. So in this case, we use frozen mango. We have a jalapeno pepper. Now, when I cut jalapeno peppers, the way I like to cut them is to hold the stem and just cut down the side. The reason being is not everybody likes the heat, especially when you're dealing with children. And the heat is normally going to be in the membrane and the seeds, and then you've got them all right here intact. See? And so you can add those, just hang on to it. If you want more heat, just chop some more up and put it in there. And then I just simply cut these and get them into smaller pieces, just so that when we put them in the food processor, that they work. Okay, and then you're just going to give it a rough chop. Okay, very easy to do. Now, it's important when you're making salsas like this that you use the fresh peppers as much as possible, because the ones that come in the jar have a lot of sodium in it. Okay, so we're going to add these. I have a little mini food processor here, and I'm just going to blend it. Hold on, I'm going to have the rest of the stuff first. All right. So an onion. So here's an onion, and this is the stem, and this is the root. So when an onion grows, it grows up and it's got a flower up on the top. Okay, if you live on the ground for a while. When you're cutting an onion, you want to cut the top off, and then the root section off, and then you're going to make your first cut from the top down to the root. Okay, right through the middle. All right. I already have this red onion, and I'm going to use it, but I just kind of wanted to demonstrate how you do that. So you have your onion. You always want to cut on a flat side. So you've got a flat surface. Try to cut it on the other way. It's going to rock around, and you're more likely to injure yourself. You're just going to make cuts that go back, and then you can turn it and go straight down. That's just how you do like a small, medium, or large dice, depending on the size. All right, and these are two going to go into my little mini food processor. All right, fresh herbs are important. They're a great way, as Susan mentioned, to add flavor without adding sodium. I have some parsley here. I'm going to show you how to cut it, but I'm going to put cilantro in the recipe. So typically, you're just going to like cut down, you know, and you want to get the parts where you don't have the rough stems. Just pop this out of my garden this morning. And then you just kind of want to make some cuts. You just got to do a rough chop because you're going to be adding it into the food processor. Of course, you would make it a lot finer if you were putting in another recipe. You can also find herbs in little pots like this, especially in commercial service, and you can use these. You can save herbs by chopping them up and putting them in ice cube trays and either topping them with oil or water, depending on the type of herb. And you can save them. All you do is thaw them out and, you know, for later use. I know, lovely sound, right? Okay, so here it is. That's all it is. There's your mango salsa. All right. So one of the reasons we like to do the salsas, we do mango, we do peach, we do blueberry. There's a lot of different flavors that you can do with the salsas. You can use, like I said, fresh or frozen fruit. But they are a great way to add flavor without adding sodium. Some of the favorite recipes that people have, like nachos or things like that, can be made into deconstructed type bowls where the base is more like lettuce. And then you have like turkey, ground turkey or ground beef or something with your taco seasoning that you make yourself. Then you can top it with the mango salsa. It also goes well with fish. You could use a rice, like a brown rice or whole grain rice. You could use pineapple salsa, mango salsa, anything, and you could top it. But you can add a lot of flavors without adding sodium. And you can also customize them for different ethnic groups or different flavor profiles that you were wanting to address. You could even do them as, you know, people going through like a salad bar where they can add their own toppings and customize it. I think that when you are removing sodium, when people feel like they have some sort of control over what they get to eat, they feel better about their options. And so giving them a certain grain and maybe a certain protein, and then letting them go add the toppings themselves in order to come up with things that may please their palate. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today also about sugar. So what is the deal with sugar? Well, I know y'all have heard a lot about sugar, but sugar is, it has no value really, other than it's sweet. Now, we have a need for sweetness. We like sweet things, okay? Salty and sweet both. But when you're consuming a lot of sugary items, they don't have any nutritional value that you get. So 85% of your calories that you need for your body to function properly need to come from your foods. And then you've got like 15 left for additional items. Well, when you are consuming sugary beverages, those are going to add up pretty quickly because they're extremely high in calories. So I have a few little items here. So here's one. I've got a couple. Okay, so here's a Starbucks. I went and got these in the vending machine out in the hallway. This is a Starbucks drink, and it has 32 grams of added sugar. Okay. Here, this is just your sports drink that you might want to consume, thinking it's a better option than a soda, and it has 34 grams of added sugar. Now, there are some foods that have natural sugar, and you're going to find those in fruit juices and things like that. So you want to look at the label, and you want to see what is added sugar. Here's one, a lemonade. So this is a strawberry lemonade. Again, you may have thought this would be a better option than a soda. It has 69 grams of added sugar. This Mountain Dew here has 77 grams of added sugar. That is a third of a cup of sugar in one drink. There's a lot of sugar. Sugar contributes to obesity, which contributes to a lot of other health risks. You need to read the labels. You never think, why would they put sugar in ketchup? And here you've got 4 grams of added sugar and 1 tablespoon. Salad dressing. This one has 300 milligrams of sodium and 2 tablespoons, and it has 3 grams of added sugar. So when you're going to the store and you're shopping, look around and see the amount of sugar and the amount of sodium that is on the label, and try to buy options, find better options that do not have as much or do not include added sugars or sodium, either one. Another thing I wanted to mention that I failed to mention when we were making the salsa is I forgot to add the lime juice at the end. So limes here, you know, acid is one of the things that you can replace sodium with. So it's more like fresh herbs, like Susan said, umami, acid, she mentioned acid. So vinegars, citrus juices, but the zest is very flavorful. And so you might want to add a little zest. In fact, you get more of the lime flavor from the zest than you actually do the juice. So you may want to zest a little. You can also zest and save it in juice, you know, if you've got a lot of lemons or limes that you need to use up, or oranges even, before you slice it and juice it in order to add it. Before you even zest it, you need to roll it. If you roll it on the counter, you're going to get a lot more juice out of it. So here's your little thing. And then you want to add that. But I do love the idea of the grain bowls. I think that they make a good addition to any commercial food service menus. And you can choose items that do not contain much sodium and do not contain added sugars as well. Also, you know, the average American consumer consumes about 100 pounds of sugar a year. I mean, I guess that tells you we have a sweet tooth, right? But what can we do? What changes can we make in order to kind of reduce that so that we have healthier and better lives? Okay, I'm open for questions. If anybody has any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. And thank you to all of our speakers. This has been so educational for me and hopefully to those on the line as well. So we are going to invite all the panelists back and we will dive in. We've gotten a lot of questions. So I am actually going to pass it to Zyla, who is going to start us off with our first question.
Thank you, Julie. So our first question is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Our first question is, did you use mushrooms for the unami in recipes, or was there a problem with avoiding allergies to mushrooms?
Our schools have never shared a mushroom allergy. It's a little different in schools to replace meat with vegetables because of their requirements. So we haven't been able to do that, but in some cases they've replaced some meat with beans, and I know that has been successful.
You could also replace some of the meat with like grated zucchini. People are less allergic to zucchini. So you could add zucchini instead. And it also, when you use the leaner types of meat, the mushrooms and the zucchini add a lot of moisture. So it doesn't feel like you're eating a hockey puck. So that might be an option, as well, if, you have mushroom allergy, to do some other sort. Zucchini's good. I've seen people use like chickpeas before as well, just kind of chop them up, put them in there, or any kind of a bean can also be a blend for some of these meats.
Thank you. Susan, I know you talked a little bit about the umami. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I actually wasn't, I wasn't even aware that mushrooms were a top allergen. I don't think they're in the top 8 or whatever, but that is interesting. And I defer to Nancy's obvious expertise in this area. So I liked her ideas.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question says, how do you find a way to preserve fresh vegetables like mushrooms in a hospital setting to keep them from going bad, as the hospitals are buying in large quantities and they would need to purchase kind of in bulk? How do you keep them good for, the week-long recipes?
You can dehydrate them. So if there's cheap little air dehydrators that you plug in the wall, and they're like stacked units that are kind of vented. You can slice them up and dehydrate them. And then you can just put them in bags. And I put them in bags and put them in the freezer because my husband has a farm and he comes home with all these chanterelle mushrooms that everybody wants. So yeah, you could do that. So that is probably one of the best things to do. And then all you do is rehydrate them. You just add boiling water. You can strain off the juices, especially if you did not wash them before you dehydrated them, which is probably wise because they may get a little moldy. But that, in my opinion, is one of the best things. You could also saute them. You could make some meat blends and things like that. You can saute the mushrooms and onions or whatever, garlic, if you want to add that. Add it to the meat and freeze it. And then you could take it out and make your patties or whatever you're going to do with it. So that's another option as well.
Great tip. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
Okay, I have another question for Bonnie. Can you share some examples on the types of marketing or education that you use in the cafeterias?
Sure, we do a lot of signage. So we've done clings. I actually have one on my window. That was like a healthy choice clear cling for our salad bars, just to highlight those items and nudge people towards choosing that. We've also done, we know one of our partners in LA did a price point adjustment for marketing, where they had, I think, some similar to what Susan mentioned, their meal that was healthier was a lower price point, and that was very successful. And we did a spice bar where, obviously pre-COVID, we had a bunch of different spices out, and the older students could come and kind of not salt their fries, but put on different like cayenne and all of that. And so we had big signage and layout there. A lot of cafeteria managers have done cute things with fruits and vegetables and made them into little animals and stuff like that for the fruit and vegetable bar to kind of encourage kids to try that.
Thank you.
Can I jump in on something real quick? Even though that was for Bonnie, but I just wanted to add.
Feel free. Anyone can share.
Yeah, thank you. We did some. We've done a lot of this in schools, but we did some new recipes in a hospital here in DC pre-COVID. I guess everybody that's obvious, but, and it really hinged a lot on the taste testing before buying, like taste this before, and as they walked in and they were like, oh, and that was mentioned earlier too. Like, so they're not going to miss their chicken nugget because they had the thing that's healthier. And they're like, I like that. And the other thing was naming products. We found if you said you want a mushroom burger or a bean burger, you're like, maybe not. But if you're like, you want a fiesta burger, you want the fuego burger, then it was just like, yeah, that sounds great. So I think some of the marketing, and it's the same for kids, it is for adults. I'll add that if the name is festive, it's more likely to sell.
So true.
We do some of those more stealth health kind of approaches because we don't want to turn people off from it being a healthy item. And if they know it's healthy, there could be kind of a resistance to trying it because they think it'll taste gross.
Definitely. And I just wanted to mention to the hospital folks that are on the line, we do have healthy hospital signage. So if you need some more, or if you want to refresh, we do have those. So you can reach out to us to get some additional signage, as we've heard from our panelists. It does help. Great. So got a question here for Dr. Bernard. They said, I've seen some plant-based items in the grocery store, and sometimes they have lots of sodium in them. Are they still the better option?
Well, they're always a better option in a couple of ways. If it's a truly plant-based option, it will never have any cholesterol in it. That's a good thing. It won't have hormones in it. Dairy products always have estradiol traces. Plant products don't have that. So it's good in that sense. But the two real issues that we're dealing with is, one is that processed foods very often do have a lot of sodium in them. So you'll see that with the vegan items as well as the omnivorous items. You want to look at the label and see. The other thing is that lately, because so many people are getting on the plant-based bandwagon now, and that's a good thing, some of the burgers are trying to appeal to meat eaters by making them as high in saturated fat as the original. So read the label there too. I'm talking about the Impossible Burger or that kind of thing, where it is certainly better than the thing it replaces. But it's there to seduce the meat eater into realizing they don't need meat. And then hopefully people will go from there to others that are lower in fat and lower in sodium as well. But if you read the labels, there are so many choices out there. And with a little label reading, you'll find the plant-based items that are good for you.
Thank you.
Our next question is, would dehydrating and rehydrating be a good use of staff time? How long does it take for each? That could make it harder to justify staff time before cooking.
Okay, so just to be clear, because my computer made a little blip. So you're asking to dehydrate it, and rehydration is what now?
Would it be a good use of staff time, and how long does it take for each?
I think so. I mean, if you've got mushrooms and you can buy them in bulk, because, there is a season on mushrooms as well, and they're shipping them from wherever. So if you can get a good price for them, I think it's worth it. It doesn't take long. You plug that thing in and you just leave it, and it can run all day, and then you can bag them up and put them in the freezer. So it's basically just chopping them into a little bit smaller pieces if they're really big. But yes, I think it would be a good use of staff time, in my opinion. So anybody else want to comment on that?
We actually got a question that kind of piggybacks off of that. It says, our hospital is really passionate about providing healthy options. We don't always have unlimited time. Do you have best tips on what the low-hanging fruit is in terms of maximizing impact? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I would swap out those procurement items like ketchup. Buy the lower sodium, lower sugar ketchup. Those things that are really, that take no effort, like buy the chips with no salt, buy the tomato sauce with no salt added. Those things that don't take any more staff time or and really don't cost much more. We didn't get to do an in-depth cost analysis, but anecdotally, we know our schools wouldn't be able to afford the food if it cost significantly more. So we did have a lot of success even without knowing the exact price points.
I would just jump in and remember that one of the big rules of thumb is that there's certain foods that are virtually always extremely low in sodium, as I mentioned earlier. Fruits in their natural state, grains in their natural state, beans in their natural state. The more those are in your menu, you are going to not only reduce the sodium, you're reducing the cholesterol, the saturated fat, as Susan mentioned. For all the people going vegan, vegetarian, they're going to be thrilled. And they're also sort of universal meals where a person is from a different religious background, or has allergies or something like that. These foods tend to really satisfy just about every client group. So those are the fruits, the grains, the beans.
Thank you.
Can you each share your favorite low sodium dish?
Well, I'll go. I am not a cook, full disclosure, but I can boil water. So my favorite thing in the world are red lentils because they cook lickety split. Some kind of grain. I don't care if it's or starch like a potato, couscous, rice, quinoa. I'll have that, and then something green. And oftentimes for me, that's something that's frozen. So a bag of frozen broccoli, a bag of frozen spinach, and then I'll put curry in it. So I have my bean, my grain, my green, and then I control the amount of salt that goes in. And sometimes that's none, and sometimes it's the spices like the curry spice, which, as far as I know, doesn't have any sodium in it.
Anyone else want to share a low sodium favorite?
I can't answer that question because I don't have one. I cook all the time, and I also am a master gardener, and I grow a lot of my own fruits and vegetables as well. To me, I don't have a favorite. I like too many foods, so.
Well, that's a good answer in the sense that there's no limits to low sodium options.
I think my favorite thing that we've done was Nancy's mango salsa. Like at the end of those trainings, the staff were like, who gets to take home the extras? And so that was good. And we actually, the schools did fish tacos with that fresh mango salsa and fish and little street tacos.
I'll share one just real quick. And I'm embarrassed that I went through just about my whole life always thinking you had to have canned beans instead of making them fresh, because I thought, they take so long, you got to soak them. Who has time for that? But somewhere along the line, I came to the realization that if you're soaking beans, you don't actually have to supervise them. They soak themselves while you do something else. And so I would soak them overnight, and then you boil them, and you don't have to boil them for 8 hours. You boil them for an hour, 90 minutes, and they're done. And you can do something else then too. So I discovered instead of having the high sodium cans of beans, I could just take some dry beans. They cost nothing. And you can cook up a huge amount. Once they're done, you take your little immersion blender and you go, and you tell your friends it's refried beans. They're really just boiled beans. No cholesterol, no sodium, whatever. Then I discovered also, amazingly enough, you can make your own salsa. Now, I might call it pico de gallo to sound a little cooler, but all it is just diced tomatoes, diced onions, a little cilantro, and everybody thinks you're a gourmet chef. So I'll have that with a little bit of rice, or if I'm feeling indulgent, maybe a tortilla or some toast or something like that. Super low sodium, no cholesterol, totally vegan. Everybody's smiling at you, and it took you like no time at all. So that's my big dish.
Awesome, thank you.
And you call it the fiesta burrito, right? Isn't that right, Susan? You're not going to call it beans and rice. We'll call it the Disney plate.
Our next question in the chat is actually about beans. What is the sodium content for canned versus prepared beans?
Well, I've got canned beans right here. So, like I said, 200 milligrams of regular, there's 210 milligrams of sodium in reduced sodium cans of black beans. And the regular, there's 410 milligrams of sodium in regular black beans. No salt added, it's going to give you about 10 milligrams of sodium per can. And then if you prepare them yourself, it's going to be so low. I mean, it might be 10 or under, you know. Depending on if you add, what kind of seasonings you add. You know, I do live in the South, if you could not tell from my accent. And so a lot of times they will add ham or something like that to beans, but that's not necessary. You can add rosemary, you can add herbs and spices and different things like that. And all you need to do is make sure you don't add any salt to them, you know, so.
Thank you. So I think we have time for just one more question. This one says, thank you all so much for sharing. Are the same principles and strategies you mentioned for sodium reduction applicable to sugar as well? What are some recommended healthy swaps? You want to take that one on?
Well, as far as like rinsing things for sugar, I wouldn't recommend that necessarily. I would just buy no sugar or fresh if you can buy fresh. But if you're trying to serve mass amount of people, you know, like in a commercial type setting, sometimes it's difficult to get canned items and frozen items, but always look for unsweetened or no sugar added, and make sure you read the labels, because if it has OSE on the end, that's probably a sugar. And they like to disguise the names of sugar. And so kind of be familiar with that and see what the label said. But make sure that it's, you know, there's no added sugars. It should say added sugars. But as far as there are some substitutions you can do as well, like if you're making muffins, you can usually use about 1/3 of the amount of sugar in a recipe, but you could also use applesauce, unsweetened applesauce. You know, so there are some, like you can use pumpkin, and anyways, there's some different things that you can use. You can also add like cinnamon and vanilla and things like that. Give you makes your brain think you're eating something sweet, because you're typically associating those sweetness with that. So yes, there are some things you can do. They're not necessarily totally interchangeable, but similar.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment before we close out? Okay, well, I'm going to pass it over to Yolette to close us out.
All right. I would like to thank all of our speakers for their time and expertise and for highlighting innovative strategies to improve health outcomes. In closing, I want to thank everyone for joining this event. We hope you enjoy the webinar and gain knowledge and skills needed to continue the great work that you are doing to address hypertension, heart disease, and stroke in the district.